this is Sweetly with a Kafka team building guide. I know a lot of you are interested in Kafka, so I wanted to go over her team options, starting with the 3 characters featured in her banner. I will try to explain the pros and cons of each and end with some team comp suggestions. Hopefully, after watching this video, if you're already planning to pull for Kafka, you'll know who you'll want to build to play with her, and if you're on the fence about pulling, then learning about Kafka's potential teams can help you make a more informed decision. Kafka is a lightning-type nihility character that synergizes with damage over time. She can inflict shock DOT with her talent plus ultimate, in addition to triggering all DOT effects currently on the enemy targets with both her skill and ultimate. Kafka's mechanic of proactively triggering DOTs greatly improves their damage, as you no longer have to wait until the enemy's turn to deal damage to them. Kafka's ability scales with the number of DOTs there are on the enemy, so ideally you want to pair Kafka with other damage over time characters for more damage overall. Before going into more detail on the 3 DOT characters featured on her banner, I want to briefly go over how damage over time works, since it's not really explained anywhere in the game. For damage over time, there are mainly 3 key aspects you want to remember. DOTs cannot crit, so you do not want to focus on crit substats on your DOT characters. Instead, you want to focus on attack percent, speed, and depending on the character, some amount of effect hit rate and break effect. For Kafka specifically, you will want her on 4-piece lightning and 2-piece space sealing station. DOTs usually deal damage at the beginning of the enemy's turn, and they do not snapshot, so actual damage will be based on the character stats at the time of the DOT tick. Kafka can make DOTs proc an extra instance during her turn, but the damage of the DOTs will depend on the stats of the characters that place the DOTs. There are 2 categories of DOTs, normal DOT and break DOT. These are counted separately and can both exist on an enemy. DOTs of the same type, as long as they're from different characters, can also coexist. For example, Himiko's hooks and Asta's burn can all be active on one enemy at the same time. More specifically, normal DOTs refer to effects like burn, shock, wind shear, and bleed, which are inflicted on the enemy from character skills, talents, traces, and light cones. Normal DOTs use the same damage formula as most other types of damage, with one big exception: there is no crit multiplier involved. Here, the base damage is typically a percentage of the character's attack, and is why you mainly want to focus on stacking attack percent for damage over time characters, since it's one of the easiest way to increase their damage. You also always want to bring percent damage spheres on your DOT characters, since the percent damage goes into the bonus damage multiplier category as shown here, and you can only get it on your sphere. Break DOTs, on the other hand, in addition to not caring about crit, also do not take into account attack or bonus damage. Instead, the base damage is purely based on the type of break, the character's level along with the break effect, and in some cases, the enemy's toughness. There are currently 4 types of break DOTs, corresponding to the type of the character that deals the breaking hit. In terms of damage, physical break DOT is the strongest and burn is the weakest. Keep in mind that entanglement and freeze do not deal damage over time, but instead they deal what is known as additional damage, and therefore Kafka's abilities will not proc an extra instance of these 2 types of break DOT. Imprisonment is in its own category, since it does not deal any damage and only action delays. Let us take a look at Serval now. Serval is a lightning-type erudition character that can inflict shock DOT with her skill and extend the duration of all shock effects with her ultimate, including the break shock DOT. Unfortunately, Serval is quite weak as a DOT character due to her low coefficients. At level 10, she only deals 104% of her attack on her shocks versus, for instance, Sampo dealing up to 260% of his attack with 5 stacks of wind shear. Also, since Serval is an erudition character, she does not have access to any of the strong nihility light cones that can help increase her DOT damage or help her buff the team. Her normal non-DOT damage coefficients are too low as well to justify building her for sub-DPS with a crit focus. However, if you like Serval and want to play her with Kafka, there is a build that can work well versus lightning weak enemies, or if you have a Silverwolf that can implant lightning weakness. The Break Serval build, which makes use of Kafka plus Serval's lightning type to quickly break the enemy toughness bar and utilizes Serval's unique ability to extend the Break Shock DOT to deal a lot of extra damage with Kafka's abilities. Break Serval is also fairly cheap to build, mainly requiring investment into her levels and break effect. Moving on to Scammer Sampo. Sampo is a wind-type Nihility character that can inflict the DOT wind shear with all of his attacks, stacking up to 5 times, and his ultimate increases the damage of all DOTs by inflicting the enemy with the AoE DOT vulnerability debuff. His debuff falls into the rare vulnerability multiplier category and is quite strong. Increasing the target's DOT damage taken by 30% pretty much directly translates to a 30% overall DOT damage increase. Sampo's other strength is his high DOT damage coefficients, scaling very well with his Eidolons. Due to his multi-hit attacks, he can stack up to 5 stacks of wind shear fairly easily, which deals a total of 260% of his attack at E0. At E4, he almost becomes a mini Kafka, triggering an extra instance of DOT damage whenever his skill hits an enemy with 5 stacks of wind shear. At E6, Sampo's wind shear deals damage equal to 361% of his attack at 5 stacks. However, Sampo's main downside is that he is very skill point hungry. Due to how important his ultimate is in applying the DOT vulnerability, in addition to helping him stack up to 5 stacks of wind shear, Sampo will need to be on a permanent skill only rotation to ensure a 3-turn ultimate, and that's assuming he has his E1. As Kafka herself will likely also be on a permanent skill-only rotation, using Kafka with Sampo can be taxing on your skill point economy and will limit the options for your last slot. In terms of Sampo's build, due to his high DOT coefficients, I recommend focusing on attack percent after reaching 66.7% EHR to 100% guarantee his ultimate vulnerability debuff hit. In terms of Sampo sets, I recommend 2-piece wind plus 2-piece musketeer with space sealing station. Finally, we have Luka. Luka is a physical type Nihility character that can inflict bleed with his skill and vulnerability with his ultimate. Similar to Sampo, his vulnerability debuff also goes into the vulnerability multiplier category. But unlike Sampo, Luka's vulnerability increases damage taken from all sources, not just DOTs. Another benefit of Luka is that he can inflict bleed on the enemy, and even though we don't know the final coefficients yet, bleed as the strongest break DOT currently has the potential to do a lot of normal DOT damage as well. Luka's mechanics also makes it such that he will likely not be as skill point hungry. However, Luka's main downside is that his ultimate is single target, and the damage increase from the vulnerability is likely going to be less than Sampo's. As most of Kafka team's damage comes from DOTs anyway, Sampo's more restrictive vulnerability buff seems stronger in this case due to the higher percent damage increase and the AoE targeting. For those of you interested in building Luka, I recommend 2-piece physical plus 2-piece musketeer with space sealing station. In addition to the 3 characters I just went over, I also wanted to quickly mention 2 more characters who I think will be very strong with Kafka. The first is Asta. Since DOTs mainly rely on attack percent and cannot crit, Asta stands out from the other Harmony supports since not only does she buff attack percent for all allies, she can also inflict her own DOT, albeit it's a bit lacking in coefficients, but I view that as more of a cherry on top. Asta also increases the speed of everyone on the team with her ultimate, which is very important, as more speed equals more turns for Kafka, Luka, Sampo, which equals more DOT stacked and triggered by Kafka. Moving more also helps keep full uptime on your debuffs. For example, if you're able to take 3 turns on Sampo for every 2 turns of the enemy, then you can ensure an 100% debuff uptime for Sampo's vulnerability, even though he is on a 3-turn ultimate rotation and his debuff only lasts 2 turns. The second character I want to mention is Silverwolf, and I know a lot of people are already planning to play her plus Kafka on the dual Quantum Lightning team. I think she is a very strong support option, especially versus Quantum weak enemies, since you can guarantee the Lightning weakness implant. Defense reduction is also calculated in the DOT damage equations and can be very strong at increasing your DOT damage. Given everything I've discussed, I think Kafka teams will mainly follow this template. Kafka plus your healer/sustain plus either Sampo or Luka, plus your flex. Sampo or Luka, or both, feels like a must-have on the Kafka team currently, due to their unique abilities to not only inflict their own powerful DOT on enemies, but also inflict enemies with a vulnerability debuff, which can greatly increase your DOT damage. I honestly recommend building both characters to get the most out of your Kafka, but if you only want to build one, or only have resources to build one at a time, I would go with Sampo first if you manage to get E4 plus for Sampo, and Luka otherwise, as Sampo's damage increases nicely with his E4 plus, and makes it quite worthwhile to build. The flex slot will vary depending on your personal preferences as well as enemy type weaknesses, but I highly recommend building Asta for the reasons I mentioned previously. Silverwolf is a great option as well, and you can also consider Branya, Tingwing, as well as Pella if you really need the skill point generation. Final thoughts. I personally think Kafka has a lot of potential, and even though she might not be as strong as the other limited 5 stars when she first releases, her power will increase with each damage over time character that releases in the future. This could make her a better rerun pull if you need someone who is strong right now, as we do have a Mega Dankun coming up. But if you like her and don't mind investing in some 4 stars that you might replace in the future, the DOT teams can be quite fun to play. Thank you for watching, and let me know in the comments what you thought of the video. Oh, if you're interested in having me pull for your Kafka, you can join the Discord and sign up.